Aloha and welcome to this recording of Bible Study Lite. My name is Dee Dee Tully and I help lead the Bible Study Lite program here at Kona Bible Church on the Big Island of Hawaii. And if you are watching this recording, then that probably means that you were not able to make it to one of our either in-person meetings or Zoom meetings, which we have every month. Bible Study Lite, when I say light, I do mean light. It is no homework, no preparation. The topic varies from month to month, so if you miss a month, you don't miss anything, you can join another month. And if you'd like to participate with us in person or on Zoom, we would love to see your face, either in person or on the screen. Please reach out to me. My email will come up at the end of this recording, and I will get you on our email list, and you will know the dates that we are meeting. And it is a little extra fun to participate in the discussion and engage in the fellowship. But if that doesn't work for you, I do record each of the presentation portions of the Bible Study Lite, and we post it at Kona Bible Church's webpage. And it also has the written handout. So you can always catch up whenever you want on that. So let's dive into this month's Bible Study Lite, which I've titled The Rock, Going to the Rock. And we're going to talk about a problem that we have living in a fallen world. And we're going to talk about the solution to that problem, a biblical solution. And we're going to talk a little bit about maybe how to implement that biblical solution. Started in getting into refer to a whole bunch of different scriptures, cut and paste and put all of the reference scriptures in the handout. So you're not furiously flipping in your Bible or on your iPhone or iPad or wherever you keep your Bible. If you want to follow along, pretty much all of the references that I talk about in this discussion are in the handout if you want to follow it along with it, or just sit back and listen. It's up to you, but I thought I'd point that out before we get started. So we're going to talk about, first of all, the problem of living in a fallen world. And well, this came out of a discussion that we had a while ago after Sunday service, and we were getting together and we just sort of chatting afterwards, and we were talking about, boy, there just seems to be so many bad things going on in the world right now. At that time, I mean, we've still got COVID, and the aftermath of COVID, Afghanistan, natural disasters, so much of violence in the world, discord, disorder, chaos, just chaos out there. And at times it feels overwhelming. And it was like, how do we cope with this? And of course, I thought about the Psalms. I thought, let's go back to the Bible and see how they coped with it. And I immediately thought of the Psalms, of course, because the Psalms have every possible human emotion and problem in them. It's every good and bad thing that as humans we have experienced. And, if you go back and look at some of the Psalms, boy, those psalmists, the ones who wrote the Psalms, they were really experiencing a lot of the same things we are experiencing now. Yeah, the technology is different, but boy, the problems are so much the same. The problems of living in a fallen world. So the Psalms do a good job of setting out the problem, similar to what we're experiencing now. And I wanted to start with Psalm 91, because this psalm is basically a laundry list of things that are wrong in the psalmist's world right now. If you go through it, there's probably 13 or 14 things that I counted up of things that are an issue or a problem for this psalm writer. Just in the first few verses, some of them. There's a deadly of night. There's arrows that fly by day. There's plagues. There's snares. There's all kinds of problems in Psalm 91. You can tell that the person who wrote this is just overwhelmed by the state of his world. And then if you look at Psalm 27, this is written by David, who is, psalm writer par excellence, but he uses such great, vivid imagery. He talks about in Psalm 27:3 that he feels like an army is besieging me and war is breaking out against him. And if you look at Psalm 31, another psalm by David, he has this incredibly vivid, potent image. He says, I feel like terror is on every side. I'm surrounded by terror. Terror on every side. And I thought, okay, these guys really sort of felt the way maybe we're feeling sometimes when we kind of get overwhelmed by all the bad stuff that's out there in the world. And, you know, the psalm had their problems, and there really are problems. As I said, I think the technology, but so much of the human and so when we were talking about this at our in-person meeting and on Zoom, we feel about sort of threw it open for discussion. How do you feel help? And, you know, there are all kinds of things that were thrown out there. Worry, frustration, anger, disgust. I mean, just a lot of things that we help to name in this fallen world that we live in. But when you get right down to it, when you really boil it down, it comes down to fear. We can call it a lot of things, but it really is fear. That's really sort of the essence of what's driving so many of these emotional responses to the fallen world. And, you know, Mahatma Gandhi had a great quote, and he said this at a time when India was undergoing a partition, and there was just horrible, horrific violence between the Muslims and the Hindus, just ethnic strife. And he said, the enemy is fear. We think it is hate, but it really is fear. And I think that's right. I think it's fear that's driving so much of this, fear of loss. You know, with COVID, we've lost so much. Some of us has lost financial security. We've lost our routine. We've lost a sense of. We've lost the ability to do so many things that we took for granted. It could be fear of the future that we have, fear of the enemy. And, you know, if we're going to be really honest, if I'm going to be really honest, I'm going to say that there's a little fear. I'll admit there's a little fear creeping in of saying, God, do you really know what you're doing right now? Are you really going to protect us? Are you really going to be there and provide for us like you say you are? There's just this fear that creeps in and sort of permeates everything. And so if this is something that you're feeling, experiencing, you know, as we were discussing, I think it's helpful to talk about it, to name it. But we have to, going back to the Word, going back to Scripture, there is a biblical solution. When you start to feel overwhelmed, when you open up the newspaper or click on just about any website or any news site right now and just kind of go, oh my gosh, how do we cope with all of this? The biblical solution is you go to the rock. The rock. And the rock is a potent, powerful, long-standing image of God himself. God is the rock. And it's really some of the most beautiful imagery in the Bible. It permeates the Bible, Old and New Testament. So just some of the examples. Jehovah is my rock and my fortress. That's from 2 Samuel. God is the rock of my salvation. My God is my rock and my refuge, the rock of thy strength. And in the New Testament, too, it carries over the symbol of God as a rock, as a solid rock. And, you know, Jesus, at the end of his Sermon on the Mount, it's the longest discourse that Jesus had, and he concludes it, and it's always important how he wraps things up, and he concludes it with the parable of the wise man who builds his house on the rock and the foolish man who builds his house on the sand. And the parable is, if you hear Jesus and his message and you follow it, you are like the wise man who builds his house on a rock. If you, on the other hand, hear Jesus's message and don't let it permeate your life and don't follow it and ignore it, you are like a foolish man who has built his house on the sand. And when the storms and the winds come, and we know they will come, they always do, then the foolish man, his house is, of course, blown away because it's built on sand. But the strong man, the wise man who follows God, the wise woman who follows God, builds her house on the rock, she stands firm. So the rock is a really important image for God. And I think when we are overwhelmed by this fallen image, by this fallen world, we want to go to the rock. That is the solution, to go to the rock. And certainly the psalmists thought that. If you go back and look at the Psalms that we just talked about, so for example, Psalm 27. This is where David says, I'm besieged by an army and war's breaking out all around me. But he's still confident. And why is that? And he says, because God is the shelter and will set me high upon a rock. Again, if you go back to Psalm 31, that's where David said, I have terror on every side. He says, he pleads to God, come quickly to be my rock of refuge, a strong fortress, my rock and my fortress. I mean, he's talking about rock 2 or 3 times just in one verse. In Psalm 28, he says, to you, Lord, I call. You are my rock. Psalm 61, David says, lead me to the rock that is higher than I. And let's go back to Psalm 91. That's that psalm that has, oh my gosh, just so many bad things that are going on in the psalmist's world at that time. But Psalm 91 does start, it says, whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. He is my refuge, my rock, and my fortress. Now, I just read you from the New International Version, but the King James Version translates the opening verse there a little bit differently. It says, whoever dwells in the secret place of the Most High will find protection, provision, and shelter. And I thought, what an interesting image, what an interesting concept or thought, this secret place within the rock. I think it's a secret place within the rock. And we talked about this at our discussion about what does that secret place look like? About like a tangible or what's your vision of the secret place? And we had some really great comments on that, and people were talking about that intimacy, fellowship with others in the secret place, anchored to God, totally loved, completely safe. And I was thinking about it, and for me, that secret place is being saturated in the presence of God, just totally aligned with Him, but just letting Him saturate you. And it's in your head, it's in your heart, but He's also in your bones. He's just everywhere. You're just saturated in the presence of God. And I thought, well, if I'm there, that's cast out all this fear that's kind of driving us to the rock in the first place. Love casts out fear. So the rock is the place in control over all of it, down to the smallest detail. And then, so I think we just need to keep that in mind. He's in control. I think the second thing we can do is strengthen the faith muscle. Faith is a muscle. We say, oh yeah, we believe, I have faith, but it's a muscle and you have to exercise it. And if you don't exercise it, it's going to get weak. And you have to be intentional and purposeful about exercising it. And you have to, I know we read the Bible and it's like, do we really believe, do we really have faith that he's going to do what he says he's going to do? Do I really believe he's truly with me? That faith is something, give some thought and some ideas about how you personally can strengthen the faith muscle. And I think the third is the trust, is strengthen our trust muscle. Again, it's something that we need to exercise and build up and strengthen intentionally and purposefully. And do you trust what you really read in the Bible? We talked about how we might implement some of this. How do you work out your faith and your trust muscles? And we had some great ideas. We had, spending time in the Word, looking back on our own life as proof of God's character and faithfulness, counting our blessings, praying. I like, particularly resonated with me the whole looking back on my life, because I can read the Bible and I understand it, but when I look back on my own life, and I thought, man, he has got me through each and every stage, each and every problem. His track record is 100%. I mean, just my own personal experiences, 100% track record. That's pretty good evidence of faithfulness. And to me, it's just like, yeah, he's been faithful. He's going to keep being faithful. And indeed, in Isaiah, it says, trust in the Lord forever, for the Lord himself is the rock eternal. So trust is really important. I think a fourth thing we can do to help ourselves get to the rock is develop patience and waiting. Okay, this is my least favorite one. I'm not patient and I don't like waiting. But I think it's important to be long-suffering and to simply bear your cross. Things don't happen in our own timing. And, even David says in Psalm 27 again, he says, wait for the Lord, be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord. So patience and long-suffering, as much as I'm like, bleh, I hate that, I think it's an important part of helping us get to the rock. And the fifth thing I wanted to bring up is from the New Testament. It's from Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5, where he says, we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. And I thought that's a great advice, Paul. We have our minds and our thoughts in our minds, and you have more control over what you're thinking in your mind than you give yourself credit for. So my mind sometimes is like a little ping pong ball. It's bouncing all over the place, and I have thoughts here, there, and everywhere, and it can take me to dark places. But I have control over my thoughts, and you have control over your thoughts and what you think. And Paul is right. We take captive those thoughts and we make them obedient to God. If it's not bringing life, if it's not what God is teaching us, if our thoughts are contrary to what God is teaching us, we take it captive and we make it obedient. You take control of your thoughts so you don't go down in that downward spiral of who knows where those thoughts will lead you. I'm sure you have other suggestions and thoughts. I mean, just think about it, meditate on it, pray about it. How can I get to that secret place in the rock? How can I get to that protection that's the rock? Because the result is extraordinary. I mean, God has given us the solution. The result is when we are on the rock, the rock that we know we can rely and depend on, we have protection, we have shelter, we have provision, we have intimacy with God. We are aligned with him. We are, as I like to say, it's saturated in his presence. So I hope this has been helpful for you in talking about the rock and how to get to the rock. I know it's been helpful for all of us who went through this and talked about it. And I encourage you to study the scriptures, get into the Word, and just get yourself to the rock, because it's the way to cope with a fallen world and still be close to God. Well, that wraps it up for this Bible Study Lite presentation. Again, we would love to see you in person or on the screen. If you'd like to join us, please let me know. I'll get you on the email list. And until then, may God bless you and shine his face upon you.